Manlius Torquatus Severinus Boethius was a Roman philosopher, theologian, statesman, and writer who lived between about 480 and 524, 525 AD. He is a pivotal figure in the history of the Roman intellectual movement, bridging the gap between Classical Antiquity and the Middle Ages. Born in Rome into an aristocratic and influential family, the genus Anicia, Boethius received a refined education, strongly influenced by Greek philosophy, especially Platonic and Aristotelian. He served under the Ostrogad king Theodoric the Great, rising to position of great power and prestige, eclipsing that of consul in 510 AD. However, his career was abruptly cut short when he was accused of conspiracy against Theodoric, arrested, and later executed. During his imprisonment, Boethius wrote his most famous work, The Consolation of Philosophy, De Consolation Philosophiae. This book is a dialogue between himself and the allegorical figure of philosophy, who consoles and instructs him on the nature of happines, evil, destiny, free will and divine providence. It is a timeless work that combines elements of Greek philosophy, especially Neoplatonic and Stoicism, while Christian perspective, although the work itself contains no explicit references to Christianity. Boethius was one of the last Roman to master both Greek and Latin. He undertook a vast project of translating Greek philosophical works, especially those Aristotle and Plato, into Latin and wrote original commentaries and treatises on logic, mathematics, and theology. His translation of part of Porphyry's Isagoge and his own commentaries had an immense impact on the development of medieval logic. His definition of person as individual substance of rational nature, rational naturae individua substantia, became fundamental to medieval theology and philosophy, especially in discussions of the Trinity and incarnation of Christ. Boethius is then considered one of the last Roman and first scholastics, playing a crucial role in the transmission of classical knowledge to the Middle Age and in the formation of scholastic thought. Well, let's go. Definition: person and individual. What do we have to consider? A person is someone who is global expression. I am a person, God is a person, the name of God is I am, therefore, the definition of individual substance attributed to Boethius, in the context of person and individual. This substance is characterized by being a rational nature capable of knowledge, love and freedom. The individual is just something common in the, without global expression, however, this is what individual substance we call a person. The difference between an individual and person is that person has something non-transferable. Person is, paradoxically, the basis of the capacity for communication, and thus the characterized impersonal is incommunicable. Although a person is an irradiating being, the personal is not common or generic, and the non-transferable is what distinguishes the individual. Porphyry's Isagoge is a fundamental work in the history of philosophy, especially for the development of medieval logic and metaphysical. It is an introduction to Aristotle's categories. What did Isagoge involve in particular? Isagoge, from the Greek, meaning introduction, is a short treatise written by Porphyry, c. 233–c. 305 AD. A Neoplatonic philosopher, as an introduction to students who would study Aristotle's categories. Porphyry's main goal was to explain 5 fundamental concepts that are crucial to understanding Aristotle's classification of beings. These 5 concepts, which became known as the 5 predicates, or quinque voces, or 5 voices in the Latin translation, are genus or genero, which is common to several different species, species, which is common to several numerically distinct individuals, specific difference or differentia, which distinguishes species from the other, within the same genus, property or proprium, a characteristic that belong exclusively to a species, making it not part of its essence, accident, or accidens, a characteristic that many not belong to an individual, without affecting its essence. Porphyry and Isagoge not only defines the terms but also relate our term to the way in which we can predicates or attribute his essence. Porphyry and Isagoge not only defines the terms, but also relates them to the way in which we can predicates or attributes qualities to a subject. He discusses how these concepts apply to reality and language, setting the stage for a deeper analysis of Aristotle's categories, namely substance, quantity, quality, relation, etc. However, Isagoge became famous for raising a philosophical question of immense importance, which would dominate much of medieval thought, the question of universals. At the beginning of his work, Porphyry briefly mentioned whether genera and species exist subjectively, or only in the mind, that is, in ment. If they exist objectively, are they corporeal or incorporeal? And they are incorporeal, do they exist separately from sensible objects or in themselves? Porphyry deliberately refuses to answer these questions in his Isagoge, claiming that they are too profound for an introductory work. Yet by merely raising these questions, he threw them into the center of philosophical debates for centuries. Porphyry's Isagoge was translated into Latin by Boethius in the 6th century. The relevance of this translation and Boethius's commentary on it is monumental for several reasons. This translation established a bridge to Greek scholarship. By the early Middle Ages, much of the original Greek philosophical knowledge had been lost in the West. Boethius's translation of the Isagoge, along with his translation of parts of the categories and the interpretation of Aristotle, was one of the few direct sources of Aristotle's logic available for many centuries. The study of logic in medieval schools and universities. The 5 predicables were discussed and taught extensively, forming the basis of what was known as Old Logic, or Logica Vestis. Porphyry raises the question of universals without answering it. Boethius, in his own commentaries on Isagoge, attempted to provide an answer that reconciled the Platonic perspectives, the tis, the realism, of universals, and the Aristotelian perspectives, that is the universals of things. However, his own solutions were ambiguous and ended up reviving and intensifying the debate on the natures of universals during the High Middle Ages. This debate led to the emergence of different positions, such as realism, that is, universals exist independently of things, nominalism, that is, universals are concepts in the mind. The development of scholastic philosophy. The problem of universals, introduced by Isagoge and continued by Boethius, was one of the central themes of scholastic philosophy and epistemologists. The discussions about genera, species, and essential differences were crucial for theology, for example the question about the nature of God, angels, and man, and for the formation of the medieval sciences. That is to say, Isagoge translated by Boethius provided an essential glossary for Aristotelian logic, but lit the fuse of the questions of universals, which became a fundamental engine of medieval philosophical and theological thought, profoundly shaping the intellectual landscape of the West.